How a junior analyst destroyed the CEO's legacy. Emily Harris never thought her dream job would feel this heavy. At 27, fresh out of grad school, she had walked through the glass doors of Whittaker & Conant with the kind of optimism you can only carry once. It was supposed to be the perfect place to grow a respected consulting firm in Chicago, filled with sharp minds and endless possibilities. But from the first week, she noticed something unsettling. Meetings weren't about ideas. They were about politics. Promotions weren't earned. They were assigned. And at the center of it all was Brandon Whittaker, the CEO's only son. Brandon was a man people whispered about in the break room. Good suits, expensive watch, but zero substance. He breezed into the office, late left early, and somehow still carried the confidence of someone who believed the world owed him everything. Everyone knew he was being groomed to inherit the company, even though he couldn't string together a coherent strategy to save his life. Emily, by contrast, was full of energy, full of ideas. But she was smart enough to keep quiet. She watched. She observed. While others scrambled to impress, Emily learned the unspoken rules never outshine. Brandon never challenged the status quo, and definitely never questioned the family's authority. Still, the silence gnawed at her. Late at night, when the office was empty, Emily would pour her thoughts into her laptop. Detailed notes, new campaign strategies, innovative approaches that could put Whittaker & Co. ahead of their competitors. She never shared these files, never emailed them, never uploaded them to the company server. They were private, her personal sketches of what could be the kind of work she wished she could do openly. And yet, beneath that quiet ambition, there was an unspoken tension in the air. Colleagues would lower their voices when Brandon passed by, offering him polite nods, but rolling their eyes the moment his back was turned. Some employees had already quit, tired of the charade. Others stayed too afraid to risk their paychecks. Emily felt trapped between two worlds, the safe, quiet path of keeping her head down or the dangerous path of actually standing up for her ideas. For now, she chose silence. But deep down, she knew the day would come when she wouldn't be able to stay quiet anymore. And in that silence, where ambition clashed with fear, the real story began to take shape. It happened on a Tuesday morning in one of those all-staff strategy meetings where the conference room air always felt just a little too thick. Emily took her usual seat near the end of the long oak table notebook, closed laptop zipped tight. She didn't bother to raise her hand or offer an idea she'd learned that lesson long ago. In this room, speaking up wasn't rewarded. It was dangerous. So she sat back quiet, listening to the same recycled jargon she'd heard a dozen times before. But then Brandon cleared his throat. His smile was smug, the kind that made people brace themselves before he even opened his mouth. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, clicking through a PowerPoint slide, "I'd like to introduce a new campaign strategy that I've been developing." Emily froze. The screen lit up with bullet points, charts, and taglines. Words she recognized. Concepts she had drafted late at night alone in her apartment. Her private notes lifted straight from her laptop, now dressed up as Brandon's visionary plan. Her stomach dropped. It wasn't the kind of generic overlap that happens in business where two people just happen to think alike. This was specific, exact, down to the phrasing of key lines she had written. But she had never shared them, not with a coworker, not in an email, not even on the company drive. Her pulse pounded in her ears as the room nodded along, pretending to be impressed. She kept her face still, but inside she was screaming, How could he possibly know? The answer chilled her more than the theft itself. This wasn't just Brandon pulling rank or stealing credit in the usual way. This meant someone had gone into her personal computer. Someone had crossed a line she thought was unbreakable. As Brandon basked in the applause, Emily's eyes darted around the table. Her colleagues clapped politely, but a few glanced at her with something unspoken in their eyes. Sympathy maybe, or suspicion that she had been wronged. Still, no one said a word. No one ever did. Emily felt a storm building inside her. Betrayal, anger, disbelief. It all tangled together until she could barely breathe. She wanted to stand up, to shout the truth, to call him a fraud right then and there. But she stayed in her seat, nails digging into her palm. Not because she was weak, but because she knew this was bigger than one stolen idea. This wasn't just about credit. This was about her freedom, her privacy, her right to exist in this company without being violated. Brandon hadn't just stolen her work. He had broken into her life. And now, sitting in that suffocating conference room, Emily realized something terrifying. The real battle had only just begun. By the end of that long week, Emily couldn't take the silence anymore. The whispers in the hall, the stolen glances from her coworkers, it was all suffocating. Brandon's stolen masterpiece was being praised across the firm, and she couldn't bear the thought of letting it slide. So when he summoned her into his father's corner office that Friday, she didn't plan to stay quiet. The blinds were drawn half away, the city skyline sliced into bands of light and shadow. Brandon lounged behind the desk, tapping a Mont Blanc pen against the polished wood, as though he already owned the place. Emily didn't wait for him to start. "You went into my computer," she said, voice steady but sharp. "Those ideas weren't yours. They were mine. You stole them." Brandon tilted his head, studying her like she was an amusing puzzle. Then, unbelievably, he smiled. Finally, he said, "I was wondering how long it would take you to say it out loud." Her breath caught. "So you admit it?" "Of course I admit it," he said easily, leaning back in the chair. "But here's the part you don't get, Emily. Around here, that's not called stealing. That's called survival." He leaned forward, voice dropping into something colder. "My family built this company. There are rules, unspoken rules. Ideas don't belong to whoever thought them up. First, they belong to whoever has the power to use them. And that sweetheart is me." Emily's face flushed hot with anger. "That's not survival. That's corruption. And I won't play along. I'll take this outside if I have to, press the courts, whoever will listen. I'm not afraid to put this in the light." For the first time, Brandon's smirk slipped, just for a second. Then it returned sharper, crueler. "You really think you'd win?" he asked softly. "You think anyone would believe a junior analyst over me?" She held his gaze, jaw set. "If I have to go down swinging, I will." The tension between them crackled like a live wire. Brandon didn't stop her from storming out of the office, but the look in his eyes as she left was a promise, a warning. Emily barely slept that night. She told herself she'd done the right thing, that the truth mattered more than her fear. Maybe she thought just maybe someone in the company would stand with her once she spoke up. But the next morning when she walked through the office doors, her world tilted on its axis. Whispers followed her down the hall. Conversations died when she passed. At her desk, an email was waiting from HR cold and clinical, requesting an urgent meeting. Attached were files, screenshots, metadata timestamps proving that she had stolen Brandon's work from the company servers. Her stomach lurched. It was the same idea flipped on its head. He hadn't just stolen from her. He had framed her. And now, before she even had a chance to fight, the entire company was looking at her like she was the criminal. The trap had been set. And she had walked right into it. The HR meeting had nearly broken her. Yet even in that low point, Emily knew surrender wasn't in her nature. Being painted as the culprit in front of the entire company nearly broke Emily Carter. The shame, the whispers in the hallways, the suspicious looks every single moment felt like a slow burn of humiliation. But Emily wasn't the kind of woman who surrendered easily. She knew better than to strike when her opponent was expecting it. know her fight would come when he least anticipated. That night, she asked to meet with Brandon Whitaker, the CEO's son and the man who had stolen her ideas. He walked into the room with a smug grin, certain she was about to beg for forgiveness or plead for her job. Instead, Emily surprised him. "You win," she said quietly, her eyes cast downward. "If this is how things work here, then I'll play along." Brandon leaned back in his chair, satisfied. He believed he had broken her spirit. To him, Emily was just another talented employee who had finally accepted the unspoken rule the higher-ups take credit, the underlings obey. He let his guard down, never suspecting that Emily was already setting the stage for something far more devastating. Days later, the company released a statement saying the earlier accusations had been a misunderstanding. Emily's name was cleared. On the surface, everything returned to normal. Behind the scenes, Emily played her role perfectly, handing Brandon watered-down drafts and half-baked concepts whenever he came sniffing around. But Brandon wasn't stupid. After a few rounds of uninspired material, he began to feel something was off. This can't be all she's got, he thought. Emily was too sharp, too creative, too relentless to be producing such mediocre work. Suspicion gnawed at him, and paranoia eventually drove him over the edge. One late evening, Emily forgot her laptop at the office. Brandon seized the chance. With the building nearly empty, he snuck into her workstation and flipped open the device, scrolling feverishly through her files. He wanted proof, something real, something brilliant that she was holding back. The following week, at a high-stakes board meeting, Brandon unveiled a project so polished and innovative that the room erupted in applause. Executives nodded, clapping their hands, praising his ingenuity. Brandon soaked it all in his chest, swelling with pride. Across the table, he shot Emily a condescending smirk, the kind that said, "You'll never beat me." But Emily didn't flinch. She rose slowly from her chair, her voice calm but firm. "That draft you just presented, it's mine." The boardroom went silent for half a beat before laughter bubbled up. A few executives chuckled, others shook their heads. To them it sounded absurd, like a desperate woman clinging to scraps of dignity. Emily let them laugh. Then she tapped her remote. The giant screen on the wall flickered to life, and suddenly, the room wasn't laughing anymore. The footage played out in chilling clarity, Brandon Whitaker alone in the office, at midnight sitting at Emily's desk. The camera caught everything, the way his eyes darted nervously, the frantic speed of his keystrokes, the unmistakable moment when he opened her personal project files. A heavy silence blanketed the room. No one moved. No one spoke. Emily's voice cut through the tension, steady and unwavering. "You wanted proof. Here it is. Every file he pulled was mine. Every idea he paraded as his own started here on my laptop." The power dynamic flipped in an instant. Brandon's smug grin evaporated, replaced by the pale shock of a man caught red-handed. For the first time since this nightmare began, Emily felt the room's eyes turn not with suspicion toward her, but with condemnation toward him. She had sprung the trap at the perfect moment, and no one saw it coming. The room was dead silent after the video ended. Brandon Whitaker's face had drained of color. The once confident smirk, the casual arrogance, all evaporated in an instant. Board members leaned forward, whispering to one another, their eyes darting between Brandon and Emily Carter. Emily stood calm, almost serene, though inside her heart was still racing. She had planned every second of this moment. The forgotten laptop left innocently on her desk late that night had been no accident. Every detail of Brandon's midnight intrusion was captured. His nervous glances, his hurried keystrokes, the undeniable evidence of his theft. She had baited him perfectly, knowing his arrogance and greed would make him fall for it. The boardroom erupted in murmurs. Is this real? I can't believe it. He actually broke into her files. Brandon stammered, trying to defend himself, but the IT security logs corroborated every frame. There was no escape. Within 24 hours, Brandon was suspended, and the CEO, caught in the scandal of covering for his son, faced intense scrutiny. News outlets picked up the story immediately. Heir apparent caught stealing from employee corporate scandal rocks Hale and Co.'s social media blew up. Brandon's reputation, once untouchable, was in ruins. Yet Emily felt no triumph in staying at the company. Despite the vindication, the whispers and shadows of doubt still lingered in the hallways. She had won the battle, but the environment had never truly changed. Instead of climbing the corporate ladder further, she chose a different path. Emily began sharing her story on a major labor rights forum. She wrote with clarity and authority, "I was nearly destroyed for refusing to play by a company's unspoken rules. Privacy, creativity, dignity, none of these should be negotiable in the workplace." The post went viral overnight. Employees across industries shared their own stories. Hashtags trended. Journalists reached out. Emily wasn't just telling her story, she was igniting a movement. Her deliberate act of leaving the laptop behind the subtle misdirection in the office, it became part of the narrative. She had orchestrated every detail so Brandon's hubris would be his downfall. Her cunning patience and foresight were lauded as a masterclass in strategic thinking. Opportunities flooded in. Universities invited her to speak. Organizations consulted her on workplace ethics and digital privacy. Emily had transformed her personal ordeal into a platform to advocate for systemic change. Meanwhile, Hale & Co. was left picking up the pieces. Investors demanded transparency, clients questioned their loyalty, and employees reevaluated their trust in management. The empire that had seemed untouchable crumbled, a cautionary tale of arrogance, entitlement, and underestimating the very people they relied on. Emily's final twist was simple but profound. She hadn't fought for a title or a corner office. She had fought for justice, autonomy, and her own voice. And in doing so, she had turned a moment of personal betrayal into a nationwide call for accountability. Standing before a packed auditorium months later, Emily addressed hundreds of young professionals. "I lost a job," she said, her voice strong, her gaze unwavering, "but I found my voice. And sometimes that's the only promotion that really matters." The applause was thunderous. She smiled, finally free from the weight of corporate oppression. Emily Carter, the accused, the almost ousted, the strategic mind behind the perfect counterattack, had emerged not just victorious, but untouchable. A living example that personal freedom and privacy are rights worth defending at all costs.